Hello, my name is Sophie and welcome back to my channel. It's that time of the month. I kind of love end of the month content because it means I don't have to think of any other ideas and I get to talk about the books I've been reading. So win-win all round. This month it's even more exciting because February has become one of my most successful reading months of all time. I had a quick look at my Storygraph stats and I think that only 2 months I've read more than I read this month, that in the time that I've been tracking my reading, are the month I went on my honeymoon and the month after I came back from my honeymoon, because for some reason the honeymoon momentum maintained. Either way, considering there was only 28 days in this month, I managed to read 10 books. And also, my TBR was 8 books long, and I read all of them. I'm just baffled. I'm very impressed with myself. I'm very proud of myself. So yeah, let's jump right in because we all know I can yap forever. This first book doesn't feel like it should be on my February wrap-up because I read 87% of this book in January. I just didn't quite get through that last 13% to be able to include it in my January wrap-up. But it was February when I finished it. So my first book of February was Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros, the third book in the Fourth Wing series, the Empyrean Saga, and I rated this 4.5, especially having read it straight after rereading Fourth Wing and Iron Flame. I just enjoyed it. I think I kind of came to the conclusion that it's not groundbreaking writing. It's not trying to be this new epic fantasy literary world. It's just trying to be a fun dragon book with some really good disability representation in a kind of genre that can't name the disability. So Rebecca Yarros has been quite explicit that Violet has EDS, Ehlers-Danlos loss syndrome, but in a kind of historical fantasy setting, they're not going to have a name for a condition like that. It just doesn't exist. So being able to include that disability rep it's just been so good. And then especially because there is some other disability rep with one of the other characters. I won't go into too much detail because obviously this is book 3, so we don't want to enter spoiler territory. But I really enjoyed this. I think once I kind of got past but it's not that groundbreaking and got to the but I am having a lot of fun level, I thoroughly enjoyed this, and I'm already excited about rereading the whole series again for when the next book comes out, because that cliffhanger, man, the end of this book, it was something else, really was something else. And from there, I went on to reading my book club book. From there, I went on to reading the book that my sibling and I chose for our little book club that we have together, and this month they chose Her Majesty's Royal Covenant by Juno Dawson. This is a book that I bought when I went on a book crawl with my sibling in York last year, and it's one of those that I picked up predominantly because I'd seen it on TikTok, and I didn't really know much about it, but I knew it was popular and I knew it was highly regarded. Honestly, I was put off by the pink. I found the colour a bit intimidating, which is really stupid, but we both read this book. My sibling rated it 1.5 stars, and I actually really, really loved this book. I rated it 5 stars. I thought it was a fantastic tale of female friendship, and female friendship in all its form. I think there's a lot of kind of expectation around being friends with the people you met at school, and I think with this group of friends in particular, it's being friends despite knowing that if you had met in any different point of your life, you definitely wouldn't be friends, and you're not the kind of people that would be friends at the age they are now, but they have that loyalty to each other because they have formed that bond so young. But also introducing new relationships to those friendships. That wasn't very well worded, but I think you know what I mean. We had the core characters, but there was also peripheral characters and additional romance elements, and there was a really good mishmash of different relationships in this book, and I really liked how they were presented. But also the magic system was sick. It was one of those that really feels like it could be real. It's the kind of urban fantasy where you're like, yeah, but is this just a cover for the fact that this is real? This could be real. I could so be being blinded by a witch by now. Yeah, I just thought it was a really cool concept, and I'm really excited to carry on reading this because I also picked up hardback copy of book 2 when I went to Hay on Wye earlier this month, and book 3 comes out this summer. So hopefully I'll be able to actually finish reading this series this year, which is very exciting. Then from there, I went on to read one of the ebooks that I pre-ordered this year. It actually came out at the end of January, but it came out on January 28th. So I thought it would be a bit tight to try and expect myself to read that in January. So I pushed it onto my February TBR. And that book was Spiral by Bal Cabra. It's a hockey romance, interconnected standalone in the Off the Ice series, I think. Well, that might be a different series. This was so mid. I pre-ordered this book, bearing in mind I haven't read the first book in the series, exclusively because the FMC is a ballerina and I'm a trainee dance teacher. I've been dancing my entire life. I love ballet. But the ballet rep in this book was a very basic Google search. There was nothing about the dance stuff that was particularly intricate or well understood. In fact, there was a lot of stuff that was based exclusively on stereotypes, didn't really represent the industry particularly well at all. And I know that's not what the book is for. Knowing that you're going to be, like, you're not going to write a hockey romance and know nothing about hockey, right? So why write about dance if you know nothing about dance? It irks me a little bit, but also the characters were bland at best. I didn't love them. There was some quite good spicy scenes, but other than that, it was very bland. The story was mid. Won't be running to read book 1, let's put it that way. Definitely won't be needing a trophy of that book. So at least I only pre-ordered it as an ebook. From there, I then caught up on the Wedding Book Club book from January because I got so wrapped up in my Fourth Wing reread that I didn't get time to read the book club book in January. So this month, TLDR on the Wedding Book Club. When my husband and I got married, we asked our guests to gift us a copy of their favourite book, so we'd have a little library of our favourite people's favourite books, and in an endeavour to read them all, we used to take it in turns to choose one, and generally I would read it and he doesn't. Now we've put all the remaining titles into a spinner so that neither of us have to make a decision. So in January, the spinner chose Our Man in Havana by Graham Greene. This is a vintage classic book that was released in 1958, and a lot of the elements of the narrative were incredibly dated. I rated this 3 stars, not because I didn't think it was good, but just because it's not my kind of book. I actually really appreciated the narrative style and thought it was quite accessible considering it is a classic. And I did think I liked the kind of comedic, witty element of being quite a tongue-in-cheek style, but it's just not the kind of book that I would reach for enjoyment. I'm not the kind of person to look at the deeper levels of a book or try and interpret its meaning because that's just not how my brain works. But, you know, the audiobook was short. The audiobook had music in it between chapters, which was weird, but, you know, mildly entertaining. The audiobook tracks were split in really odd places. Like sometimes it would be mid-paragraph, it would split to a new track, which was very odd. But I've read it now. I can take it off my TBR. I can take it off the wedding library. And I can say I've read it. Then I read my second ebook of the month and another pre-order, and that was Ali Hazelwood's new book, Deep End, which I think I rated 4.5 in the end. I am just going to double check that. In Ali Hazelwood's last adult release, which was Not in Love, there was an author's note at the beginning that said this book is arguably more erotica than romance. And I concluded reading that book saying, actually, I think even though the spicy elements of the book were more prominent than in her other books, I would argue it wasn't really part of the plot because the plot between the main characters was their roles within the STEM industry and the way that the businesses were conflicting. I would argue that the spicy elements were a much smaller part of the plot and their relationship. Whereas with Deep End, I would not argue at all that that was just erotica. There was a tiny, tiny bit of plot outside of the sexual part of their relationship, but that part of their relationship was very, very prominent. It was a very stereotypical Ali Hazelwood romance, but it just also had way more spicy scenes in it. And one criticism I've seen a lot of people having is that flaunts itself as having these really kinky characters who are exploring kink, but actually they do the same thing in every single scene, and there's nothing that particularly explorative on page, and the more I think about it, the more I agree. Yeah, I found the spicy scenes were a bit much for me anyway, but now that I've heard that critique, I'm like, yeah, actually, they just did the same thing every time they got together. And she cried all the time. The FMC cried all the time, and it was very odd. Didn't really understand it. If you took some of the spicy scenes out, I still enjoyed it. That's why I rated it 4.5. For me, personally, I can't say I'll be exploring more within the erotic romance genre. It's not really my taste, but I do love Ali Hazelwood, so I did still very much enjoy it. Just wasn't my favourite. Then from there, I went on to read one of my 25 in 2025 books for last month, whatever month we're talking about. And that was The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. This is a reread. I read this book as a teenager, but when I was getting back into reading and I was cataloguing my books in apps that didn't exist when I was a teenager, I marked a lot of the books from my childhood as unread, so they counted as part of my physical TBR as an excuse to reread them, and that excuse is coming to fruition. So I reread The Perks of Being a Wallflower, and I absolutely adored it. I was a little bit worried that it wouldn't hit the same way because I am so far removed from being a teenager, and it has such a universal impact. I don't know if it's me projecting, but I would argue that Charlie is an autistic protagonist. I just think the way he engages with social situations and the way that he does exactly as he's told, he kind of blindly believes everything he's told. I really do think he's an autistic character with other mental health issues as well. But I don't think it's just trauma that makes him the way he is. And I loved reading about it. I loved reading about Charlie finding an inclusive group of friends that were prepared to meet him where he was rather than expecting him to be anything else. It was just a really lovely story, and rereading it was a joy. So this is your sign. If you're thinking about rereading some of your childhood favourite books, I thoroughly recommend it. Then from there, I was back on the book club grind because I read The Number One Ladies Detective Agency by Alexander McCall Smith, which was the Wedding Book Club book for February. So I'm caught up again now. This is, I believe this was published in the 90s, maybe the early 2000s. And it's about a detective agency, shock horror, based in Botswana. It was fine. It was fun. I rated it 3 stars. The audiobooks are all on Spotify. They're ever so slightly abridged, so I couldn't co-read this book because the words that are in this book are not exactly the same as the ones in the audiobook, and that's too much for my brain to comprehend. The audiobooks are narrated by the woman who plays Lady Danbury in Bridgerton, which was very nice to listen to. She's a fantastic narrator, so I hope that she did the rest of them. There are 26 books in this series. We don't own all 26. I believe we got a box set of maybe 6 or 7 for the wedding. So I have put the second book in this series back on the spinner, so I will get to it eventually. I'm not rushing to read them all straight away. But this was fine. It was a nice, cozy mystery, very easy to listen to. I'm not dreading listening to the rest of the series. So take from that what you will. And we're into the final 3. So I've not yapped quite as much as I thought I would. Going back to talking about rereading books from your childhood, I reread the first book in the Maximum Ride series last month because, again, that was also on my 25 in 2025 for the same reason that The Perks of Being a Wallflower was on it. So I decided to add a category to my monthly TBR, which is continue a series, so I could read book 2. And I did read book 2. Book 2 is called School's Out Forever. The whole series is by James Patterson. This is continuing the adventures of the 6 genetically engineered kids who are 2% bird and have wings and can fly. And it was just as fun as rereading the first one. This book, borderline sci-fi fantasy, it's built the foundations for the books that are popular now, and I just love it. Rereading this is so much fun, and I don't know what it is, whether it's the formatting or the pacing, but I can read these books faster than I read any of the other books on my TBR. So I absolutely will be trying to read book 3 in March, and I'm very excited about it. This was another 5-star read. And then I was on to the last book of my monthly TBR, another one from my 25 in 2025, and that is The Luminaries by Susan Dennard. I ended up rating this one 3 stars because I liked the world building and the fantasy system. It's all based on there being like a magical forest where all these fantasy creatures, like evil fantasy creatures, spawn every night, and the magical community that surrounds the forest take it in turns each day of the week to protect the community from these creatures, and all the people that work on each night of the week are named after that night of the week. So the main character is called Winnie Wednesday because she's in the Wednesday clan, but her and her family have been shunned from the clan because her father was revealed himself to be part of a rebellion group. That wasn't explained particularly well, but it was kind of explained enough to keep you on tenterhooks. The whole thing is meant to be quite vague. Generally, I thought this was fine. I really did like the magic system. I generally liked the characters. I think the thing that I didn't particularly like about Winnie is nothing to do with Winnie herself or how she was written. I thought she was a very well-written character. I think, especially because she was 16, so I think she was well-written for 16 in that she wasn't too childish, she wasn't too mature. I just don't particularly engage with 16-year-old girls being 12 years older than them. And I don't want to be one of those girls in their 20s that's like, oh my god, I'm so far away from being a teenager. But I think I am in a very different stage of life, so I'm in a very different mindset. So there were things and the ways that Winnie acted that irritated me, and I didn't love her as a protagonist. I also thought it was quite slow-paced. This entire book takes place over the space of about a week. It felt like months. Genuinely, I kept having to remind myself that this was only happening over the space of a few days, and this previous event only happened like the night before, because things were technically happening quickly, but they felt quite slow. So pacing was a bit of an issue, but I am definitely hooked enough in the series that I'm going to read book 2. I already have it on my shelf, and book 3 I think came out at the end of last year, so I'll probably end up reading that at some point. But yeah, I kind of hope this series gets better because I didn't love book 1. But 3 stars is still good. It's an average, it's slap bang in the middle. It's a good rating from me. So that was The Luminaries. And that was the book that meant I had officially finished my February TBR. And I was so stoked to have actually read all of the books on my list for February. So then I obviously had to come up with a new system to decide what I would be reading next, because I'm not a mood reader. The thought of not knowing what I'm reading next fills me with dread. I find that incredibly intimidating and I hate making decisions. So I came up with a system, and that is going through the books that I've bought, my new buy books for this year, and just working on reading them. I could be working on more of my backlist, but I figure if I'm spending the money on books, I should actually be reading them. So I went through my list, and the first book I have acquired this year that I hadn't read was Powerful by Lauren Roberts. Why am I holding it like this? It wasn't actually this edition. I got the hardback edition from Waterstones, but I didn't want to read that one, so here's the paperback that I got from The Works, which also has very pretty sprayed edges. That being said, I rated this book 3.5. I thought it was fine for a novella. There's only so much you can engage with the characters in a novella. I think this one's a little bit different because it's based on a character that's in the main series, or at least the first novel. I've not read the rest. And we know exactly what happens to her at the end of that book, so we knew how this would end. So you were building up this new relationship and these new characters, knowing what was going to happen to Adina. I thought the characters were a bit two-dimensional. I thought Adina was very... when I was writing my review in my book journal, I described her as a kind of Barbie character, as being just needlessly positive and optimistic and full of energy all the time. And it just felt like she didn't really have any emotional depth as a character. And then Makoto, who is the male main character, again, just felt like a stereotypical, I've got secrets to hide and I can't burden her with the things I know, and I'm a dark, mysterious character. It just felt really stereotypical. But what I realised when reading this, similar to Fourth Wing actually, is that the writing's not groundbreaking, but I enjoy reading it. This series, I think, because it's so inspired by the books that shaped my taste as a teenager, it makes me feel nostalgic despite reading it for the first time, and I'm allowed to enjoy that experience whilst acknowledging that it's not groundbreaking fantasy, it's not a particularly original story, and the characters are all quite stereotypical, but I did have a decently nice time. So I rated it 3.5 stars, and then I realised that book 3, Fearless, comes out in April, and I've already pre-ordered it, so I need to read book 2, Reckless, before Fearless comes out, and then I will have finished the series, so I can take one series off my currently reading list. So it's nice that I'll actually have a series finished quite soon, and that was a nice realization to have. And those are the 10 books that I read in February. It's just wild. I don't know how I did it. I've got 7 books on my March TBR. I'll leave that linked up there if you're interested in finding out what books they are. I really don't know if I'm going to be able to maintain this momentum, especially since the first book I'm reading is a non-fiction book about Winston Churchill, written by Boris Johnson. Not the book I would have chosen for myself, if I'm being honest, but it's in the wedding library, and I said I would read everything in the wedding library. So here we are. That's everything I read in February. Please do tell me what you've been reading recently in the comments. I'd love to hear about them. Or if you've read any of these books, I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a great day, and I'll see you next time for another bookish video. Bye!